Hello, thanks for tuning in. It's April 30th. I'm following up on my last video regarding new religious movements and cults and what's the difference, if there is any. I want to go back to my college days around 1968-69. I had a theology teacher that took an interest in my development. I took an honors course from him, and my thesis was on William Blake. And so we became friends after college and stayed in touch for some years. But I remember he gave me a brochure. It was around 1969, shortly before I was graduating. And he wondered if I would be interested in a group that was in the brochure. And it was called the Prosperos. I'd never heard of them. I read the brochure and I completely forgot about them actually after college. And after my cult experience with Church Universal and Triumphant, I remembered it and I began to look them up, and there is some stuff on the internet about them. But if I mentioned the name to you, you would think, what's that about? And if I said it was a cult, you would think something bad was going on. If I said it was a new religion or a new philosophical movement, you would think, well, okay, maybe it's intriguing. Well, it's kind of both, depending again on your point of view. The group was founded by this kind of a self-proclaimed mystic, Thane Walker. Here he is teaching in front of his class, and they're having kind of a group hug, which they have a particular name for when they do this. This is probably taken around 1980, somewhere around there. He was born perhaps in 1900. He hinted maybe it was 1890. No one really knows. He died in 1989. He taught actively for about 60 years. Thane Walker was a student of Gurdjieff, George Gurdjieff, who died in 1939 and was a mystical teacher. Some people would have called him a cult leader. I certainly would have, or do. And but also, according to the Prosperos website, they said Thane was dean and founder of the Prosperos, a school in the avant-garde of what is being called New Thought. All right, so New Thought was founded by Phineas Quimby and extended by a lot of other teachers that Thane Walker studied under. It said in his more than 60 years of work, Thane has been associated with such minds as Gurdjieff, Lillian de Walters, Emmett Fox, Freud, Jung, and Krishnamurti. Author, worldwide lecturer, teacher, and friend to his students, Thane always strived to offer guidance to those seeking greater freedom. In 1936, at an International New Thought Alliance convention in San Francisco, Ernest Holmes, who was a founder of one of these New Thought schools, called Thane the teacher of teachers. So among esoteric circles, people knew about him. He had quite a following. So if we turn to one of the so-called cult apologists, J. Gordon Melton, who collected an enormous amount of work about new religions and cults and whatever, and did some important books, but he tended to lean toward offering information that the group offered about themselves. So he would rarely go into really critical territory that didn't reflect how the group felt about themselves. For instance, he says that the Prosperos were a group stemming from the fourth way philosophy of George Gurdjieff, founded in 1956 by Thane Walker, a charismatic student of Gurdjieff, and Fez Cahill. Fez Cahill was another founder of the Prosperos, co-founder. But Walker was the main guy. It existed somewhat in Florida, then in Hawaii, where Walker lived for some time, but it also moved to California, where the main center is. And Melton here says that they reported some 3,000 members in California, and this is somewhere around 2,000. Well, the number is more like 300. Of active members. Maybe 3,000 people may have passed through the organization. They have done a lot of lectures over the years. But again, here we have the cult apologist or the new religion movement researcher using the brochure number of 3,000, where in reality, the number is much, much smaller than that. All right, so what is it? Cult or new religion? Well, you know, you can look at it different ways. One of the interesting aspects of this was that a group of people from an organization called the Daughters of Bilitis. Now, you've probably never heard of that group either. This was one of their magazines, and you can see this woman with short hair with a mask off of her face, and the magazine was called The Ladder. I think it went out of publication in the 1990s, but it was part of the Daughters of Bilitis publications. And in this article, in Bodies of Evidence, the practice of queer and oral history, which is dedicated to more the LGBTQ community, there's an article here that came out in 2012, written by two people that were part of the DOB, or Daughters of Bilitis, Sandy and this other lady. And they write in this article that Sandy and I were in the Prosperos, 1965 to 1970, most active. There were all kinds of students. By the way, Thane Walker believed in a god of androgyny, and he believed in a lot of other things. He had a weird form of astrology that he taught, certain kinds of cosmology, borrowed a lot from New Thought, which basically means that if you have the mind of God, you will be healthy, you will be wealthy, you will be wise, and so forth. And so if you keep doubts out of your mind about that concept that you are God, you will be like a god on earth. And some of his followers saw him as a living God. In any case, these two lesbian ladies, they joined the Prosperos for around 5 years. And they said the students were mostly rebels, agnostics, atheists, freethinkers. It brought me back full circle to where I had begun. Sandy and I were in our late 30s and 40s when we were most actively involved. The Prospero's founder, Thane Walker, gathered archetypes from all over the world. He was a great deal older than we were. He may have been born in 1900. Thane was a teacher with a capital T. He was handsome, a white-haired gent, based in Hawaii for many years, but born and raised in the Midwest. There were groups throughout the nation in a great many states, with a center in Georgia. It would be characterized as a New Age sect or cult, so they don't have a problem calling it that. Thane was about right thinking in the abstract. He came looking for us. He reached out to homosexual groups because he thought his teachings would help them. So he attracted all kinds of elite people. They would call themselves eccentrics. When you look on their website, you see pictures of them from, let's say, 1971. There's a whole variety of pictures of their classes. And there maybe have been 30 or 40 people at their convention, their annual convention. So, you know, the number 3,000 that Melton puts out there is a little bit misleading. Yeah, so cult or new religion. Certainly these ladies that were in this, the BOD group, felt that it was cult-like. And emerged from it, left it, rejected it in the end. As far as Walker's concerned, my position is that he is a kind of a middle-of-the-road cult leader. He wasn't abusive in the sense that, say, Rajneesh was, or Jim Jones was, or the leader of Nixium was, but he fancied himself in a grandiose way as being able to interpret the mystical waters that are out there and use Gurdjieffian methods, meaning to disrupt the way the student thinks in order to help them come up with new ways of grasping their mystical reality and coming into a higher octave or a higher level of learning and self-awareness. So the teachings could be attacking you or in some way, and they also could be humorous. They went all over the place. Thane Walker encouraged theater. They would put on plays, much like Gurdjieff encouraged theater and dance among his followers. And he also encouraged a kind of astrology. He taught something about the moon wobble, that every 85 days or so, the moon goes into this little wobble, and it really does. and that there's a certain energy that comes with that, and people have to be aware of that, because things can go wrong on planet Earth among people without them being aware of it. There's more crime, more anxiety, more things can go wrong. At the same time, by the same token, if people understand the energy, they could make use of it and become more creative and so forth. Well, that's astrology. It takes something from science, like Thane Walker did, which is accurate science, and then transliterates it into human behavior, how that affects human behavior. And of course, Thane, being the great genius of the mystical waters, he can help interpret, how these things are going to occur in your life. And if you talk to him person to person, as many of his students did, he would very knowingly allow you to come to some conclusion about your mystical achievements. Anyway, you probably never heard of the Prosperos, and I think a lot of you have never heard of the latter, or the daughters of Bilitis. There's some interesting things on the internet about both of these groups. I'll put some links on this talk. But you really need to know which perspective you're coming from. For instance, the daughters of Bilitis, they started out as a lesbian support group, one of the first in the U.S. And let me just read this quickly to you. The Daughters of Bilitis, it was the first lesbian civil and political rights organization in the United States. The organization formed in San Francisco in 1955. As the DOB gained members, their focus shifted to providing support to women who were afraid to come out. The DOB educated them about their rights and about gay history. In other words, they had to be very careful how they presented themselves to the general public and to the police, which harassed them sometimes at their meetings, because you weren't allowed to be gay in those days, right? In other words, if someone dressed butch, they would call them out and maybe accuse them of something. So the women tended to dress feminine. And when they presented themselves to the public, they said, well, we're just a poetry club or something like that to disguise what they were doing, thus the mask in their magazine. They had to disguise themselves in order to begin this process of getting more awareness and rights in their right to come out as they are. And of course, we're in a whole different world today regarding LGBTQ rights. I mean, the tension is not over in society, but the openness is a lot different than it was back in 1955, certainly. But again, two of these women tell their story. They were vulnerable to joining this cult that sort of accepted the fact that they were homosexual and then dragged them into these mystical waters, with Thane Walker being that great boatman on the raft in the swamp where there's a lot of fog and mist and dangerous creatures in the waters, and he would be guiding this group through that. The white-haired mystic. Take a look at these two groups. I think you'll find them interesting. I'll leave links for them. Thank you for listening.